Hi, I'm Rick Dior, and today we're going to talk about playing fast jazz. It's something that eludes a lot of drummers, and of course, when I was young, it was one of the things that I aspired to do. I listened to a lot of records. One in particular was Woody Herman's Caledonia with Jake Hanna, also Maynard Ferguson's version of Aerogen with Peter Erskine was very influential, and those were records I would put on and try to play with and could never quite keep up. So one summer when I was about 16, I decided to spend the whole summer trying to figure out how to do this. At that time, I was taking lessons with several really great teachers. So we would work on hands and finger control, and I felt like that was the key. You know, every time I watched some of these great drummers play, I could see the way their fingers were moving, and they were very relaxed in the shoulders, and it was mostly a wrist turn motion like this. So it was one stroke, one wrist stroke, but they would get three sounds. So what I decided to do was to break down the ride cymbal to its lowest common denominator, which is a bounce, which would be this. And I practiced that every day for, I know it seems strange, but for about an hour, just trying to get a really even sound with just two notes. Now to do that, you have to actually drop the stick and then push it up with your fingers. So it's kind of like a clinch. It's not a violent clinch like that, but it's just very relaxed, letting the stick bounce, and you're basically just stopping the stick with your fingers. And I'll work on things like shuffles. And unison, where I'm playing the snare drum with it. I work on that also quite a bit every day. And after about a week, I started getting some good results. I'd record myself. Back in those days. We had cassette recorders, nothing like it is now. And I had a little Sony Walkman cassette recorder, and I'd record myself over and over again, just listening for the evenness of sound. And then I'd play with records and actually record myself doing that. I particularly liked the way he would double up on his pattern, so like this. Got several chances to see him play in New York when I was younger, so I was a beneficiary of that. And I could see how his hand was moving, and he'd lift up his arm and basically use a lot of fingers. He had just incredible technique. And he used, of course, the old Ks, which I was infatuated with, that sound, you know, as many drummers are and were. One thing about the older cymbals, and I did recently put up a video about the old Ks, they're very soft, the metal, so they tend to fight back. In other words, they're always in motion, so you kind of have to ride the wave. You see the way that cymbal is moving like that, it's actually pushing back at you. So I guess once you jump on that wave, it becomes easier. With modern cymbals, this is a Paiste traditional flat ride. Much, much, much easier to play because you don't have that fighting back. It's basically kind of like playing on a table. But the very thin hand-hammered cymbals are harder to play fast on. Of course, back then I didn't own any old Ks. I just had As. And so it was much easier. Once I got these, I had to kind of learn how to play fast again because of the motion. So that's just a little note on that. So I would listen to these records. Also, Art Taylor was a big influence, the great drummer who played with lots and lots of great jazz players. And he could play incredibly fast and clean. Of course, Max Roach, some drummers like, excuse me, Art Blakey, played fast, but they played like this. In other words, he would just dig the stick into the cymbal. I could never, I loved Art so much, but I could never quite hear the definition of that cymbal. I wanted to get like that Art Taylor kind of sound or Tony sound where you really heard. So that was my dream to do that. So getting back to what I worked on, as soon as I felt comfortable with that, started getting faster and faster and faster till it actually developed into a several drummers use that technique. It's like a push-pull technique, but it's very useful for playing jazz. So as I got faster, then I added another note, which would be the third note, which is... Now, instead of just practicing, what I did was I accented the third note. So I did this. Now, I wouldn't play a gig like that, just going, having that accent, but that did strengthen my last note, because obviously, because of gravity, if you drop a stick, every consecutive note will get softer and softer till there's nothing there, right? Well, if you use your fingers, let the first two bounce, and then use your fingers on the third one, you can get all those notes even. So at first, I was doing the two notes, getting those even, then I added another note. So you can see how all the notes are even. That's very important. And that's the secret to playing fast, is letting that stick bounce and then recovering your clinch or the pushing of the fingers as that bounce wears out. Okay? I hope that makes sense. I'll tell you what I'll do. Let me pull this other cymbal over here. And let's get a close-up of this. This is a Paiste 602 flat ride. I love flat rides, by the way. Roy Haynes is one of my favorite drummers, and he played cymbals like this, small bell or flat rides, very dry. It's just a beautiful sound. This is an old 602, similar to that Paiste traditional. It's a really great cymbal for playing soft and fast. So there you can see the motion of the wrist. Okay, now the last element of my development was playing with a wrist turn. So that looks like this. So the stick is actually traveling so it's 1, 2, 3, and then back to the beginning. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So by looping over your wrist, you're alleviating a lot of the strain and stress when you have to play for a long time. When I lived in New York, I would play a lot of gigs, and they played really fast there. A lot of the musicians, just incredible horn players and pianists, and they just like to play fast. So you had to keep up. So I would practice for hours just keeping it going. So that wrist turn, as you play faster, it becomes more and more compact. So you start out until you're barely moving. It's this much. So we'll go back over here. Now, as you play faster, the rhythm doesn't really have that triplet feel anymore. It becomes straight eighths. So there's really no way when you're that fast to play with any kind of, triplet feel. It's just straight. So once I felt comfortable doing that, I was able to actually start playing with those records, like I said, Aerogen, Caledonia, lots of the later Miles Davis from Four and More, the live record. So it's really good to play with a lot of different recordings and listen, obviously, to a lot of different drummers to get the feel. Every drummer has a different ride cymbal sound. It's like their signature. You could put on a recording and identify that drummer by either his cymbal sound, the actual instrument, or the way he phrases his cymbal rhythm. Very, very simple to do. So the next step was trying to get some sort of coordination with that where I could, play the rest of the kit. And that's a whole nother different can of worms. So I started simple just by trying to play the hi-hat on 2 and 4. And again, I would play with these recordings and do that over and over and over again, and then play with the metronome. Make sure you put the metronome on 2 and 4. That's really important. Not all 4, definitely not 1 and 3, but so 1, 2, 3, 4. Where the hi-hat's going to go, that's where you want to have it. It's more of a feel thing, so that's incredibly important to do that. So once I felt comfortable doing that, then I tried to play some snare drum stuff, and that's when I hit a wall, because all of a sudden, we're talking about hand coordination. And as soon as I did something with my left hand, my right hand would cease to exist. So I started simple. I started just playing single notes. So like on 1 and then 2. And that's harder than it looks. And then go to 3 and 4. Now, of course, my left hand I'm playing at halftime, and my right hand is double time. So that's something to really try. In John Riley's, I believe it's his second book, Beyond Bop, he's got a great section on playing fast, and he talks about this as well as, trying to just play simple figures with your left hand, and while you're playing double time. It's very, very difficult. But that's what you need to work on first. Then, once I developed that, I would try to play double time with my left hand. So I would come up with figures. All kinds of little motifs I would play over and over. I'd sort of have a conversation with myself there and go back and forth with my left hand while keeping that cymbal just straight. That's very important to get that, ding, 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 ding. Just, later on, we're going to talk about mixing it up. But for right now, keep it straight. So, and then again, you go back every day and you play with these recordings and you try to hang with them. And this is important before you go and try to play gigs with guys playing 1,000,000 miles an hour. You don't want to go and just, not be able to do it. Once you go out there and you make an ass of yourself, then that's pretty much going to be it. So you got to make sure you're ready to do this. And all the great musicians in the big cities throughout the world are going to be able to play at breakneck tempos. That's just part of the jazz legacy, starting with Charlie Parker and John Coltrane, and obviously all the modern great jazz players can just blaze. It's all about technique and relaxed technique and be able to create at that speed. So the next step is trying to introduce the bass drum. Again, another issue. So You can start out by feathering. By feathering, I mean playing really soft quarter notes. Or you could just not play it at all and just hit particular notes. So just a little pitter-patter comping, nice and light. You don't want to play this. That's not going to work with modern music. And even in the old days, when they were playing fast swing, and swing never got that fast, but when they were playing that, they wouldn't play the bass drum. They just wouldn't do that. So you can just play it nice and light and do as Max Roach did with Charlie Parker and just drop bombs here and there. So that kind of thing, back and forth, up and down. And of course, there's lots and lots of books that you can get on jazz coordination, and a lot of this is in there, the bass drum, the snare drum. It's just a matter of seeing which exercises work. One thing that's really useful to do is take any rhythmic exercise, like Syncopation by Ted Reed, which is take those rhythms and playing up and down. In other words, all the eighth notes might be snare drum, all the quarter notes might be bass drum. And even if you have 16th note rhythms, you can alternate rhythms. So you're playing up and down, up and down. So, at an even tempo, metronome on 2 and 4, and for a long time. You just got to play. You just got to practice every single day till you're comfortable. And one thing about playing fast, it's, your body, especially as you get older, you're going to have days where you feel just like you can't do anything. You're tight. If you're going to go play a jazz gig or any gig, I would definitely suggest warming up beforehand, because when you have to play one of these tempos, if you're tight, your wrist will and fingers will just lock up. So you got to be relaxed and loose. So the next step would be breaking up the cymbal pattern. This is important for a lot of reasons. First of all, it sounds good. It's very interesting to do it. And second of all, it relieves a lot of the tension that you get from just playing that ding, 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 ding over and over again. So what I did for this was, number one, I copied a lot of drummers I heard doing it. Of course, Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, all those guys were playing, mixing up the cymbal pattern. And again, record yourself. A lot of times when you're trying to do this, you can fall into these patterns that just keep repeating themselves, and which is very monotonous. So you got to make sure you're doing that, you have enough variation so you can make it interesting. So when you do that, the snare drum acts as a little bit of a pusher, I call it. It kind of gooses along the right hand. I hope that makes sense. But what happens is, just with the snare drum and the cymbal, is this kind of interplay. So whatever you come up with, just sit down and improvise. At first, it's going to be really, really difficult, but you'll get it. You just got to keep doing it. And then again, once you get that, a great thing to do is just sit down and play with a snare drum and a cymbal, no hi-hat, no bass drum, with recordings. You're just holding it together like that. And then, of course, the same thing, you add the hi-hat. Now, the interesting thing is you can get the hi-hat to start interplaying with the snare drum. So it's not only on 2 and 4 anymore. You see how it's playing in between notes. You can also splash. come over and play it. Your left hand can move from left to right. Really interesting things to do. And again, that alleviates a lot of the stress from the right hand. So I hope that helps. I'm going to play just a little bit and we'll call it a day.